Russia has always been a land of contradictions, massive, secretive, and just loaded with mystery. When it comes to UFOs, the place is like a bottomless pit of weirdness. We're talking about events that don't just stretch across decades, but across the entire Soviet Empire, a system that hated public panic, hated bad press, and hated admitting anything it couldn't control. But sometimes the sightings were so big, so undeniable, they leaked out anyway, from Siberian forests flattened by a blast the size of a nuclear bomb, to glowing jellyfish-shaped UFOs over major cities, to divers in the deepest lake on Earth claiming they ran into giant underwater humanoids. Yeah, giant underwater humanoids. So buckle up, we're about to dive into some of the most infamous, most disturbing, and flat-out strangest Soviet UFO cases on record. Stories that blur the line between history, science, secrecy, and pure legend. So let's start at the beginning. 1908, the Tunguska event. Now, I know you've heard of it. If you haven't, well, where the hell have you been? This wasn't just some local mystery. This was the biggest non-nuclear explosion in recorded human history. On June the 30th, 1908, a fireball streaked across the Siberian sky, and moments later, 80 million trees were flattened like matchsticks. 80 million. The shockwave circled the globe twice. And the strangest thing, people in London could read their newspapers at midnight without a lamp for days afterward, thanks to whatever the hell lit up the upper atmosphere. The standard explanation, according to astronomers, is a comet or an asteroid exploded in midair. Boom, problem solved, right? Well, the problem is no crater, no big rock fragments, nothing you'd expect from something that could unleash that much energy. Instead, we've got scattered eyewitness reports of glowing lights, columns of fire, and fiery objects flying in formation. Excuse me? Formation? That's not exactly how a comet behaves. So what was it? A space rock? A natural hydrogen explosion? Some kind of volcanic activity? Or Nikola Tesla testing some kind of death ray from across the ocean? Yeah, people have suggested that. Or, here's the spicy one, something artificial from somewhere out there. 100+ years later, Tunguska is still a half-solved riddle. And if the Russians know more, they're not talking. That being said, I still tend to support an air-bursting cometary theory, and here's why. Even though there's no definitive crater, Lake Cheko, for example, was proposed as a crater, but evidence suggests that it predates 1908, that doesn't mean that there wasn't some sort of cometary explosion. An airburst would have left very little evidence of a crater, but just widespread destruction. In addition to that, though, there are no macroscopic remains, as I suggested before. No significant asteroid-like fragments have been found at all. There have been some microscopic particles such as silicates, magnetite, and trace iridium in the soil and peat, but these are far from conclusive. However, what about the clouds in London? What could have created this glow? Well, comets are largely comprised of ice, both CO2 ice and water ice, and an air-bursting comet probably would have created a massive plume of highly reflective material in the upper atmosphere that might have traveled all the way to England and then at night would have reflected sunlight down onto the city, again bright enough to read newspapers. So the London phenomena actually supports a cometary airburst theory. All of that having been said, though, the fact that no macroscopic remains have been found still leaves this topic open. We don't know for certain what happened in Tunguska in 1908, and it certainly didn't help that the Soviet government, the new Soviet government that is, didn't send an expedition until a couple of decades later. So let's fast forward to 1977. Cold War paranoia is running hot, and both the US and the Soviets are shooting stuff into space, half of it experimental. Then, over the city of Petrozavodsk in Karelia, hundreds of people look up and see a glowing jellyfish in the sky. Yeah, that's the description. A massive, radiant jellyfish-like UFO hovering over the city, shooting beams of light down to the ground. Some of these rays were so intense that witnesses swore they drilled into the soil. Now, here's the kicker. The Soviets had just launched a satellite, Cosmos 955, but come on. Since when does a satellite hover for 10 minutes over a city skyline, shoot beams into the ground, and then slowly drift away like it's on display? And it wasn't just Petrozavodsk either. Witnesses across Finland, Estonia, and even Scandinavia, and by the way, some of these nations were not on very friendly terms with the Soviets at the time, and they all reported the same thing. Multiple observatories logged it. It was far bigger than just one city having a mass hallucination. And the Soviets were so spooked that the Academy of Sciences actually wrote an internal memo labeling it an anomalous phenomenon. Think about that. This is the same government that denied Chernobyl was a problem while it was literally glowing in the sky. If they admitted anomalous phenomenon, it means they had no idea what the hell it was. And to this day, the Petrozavodsk jellyfish is one of the weirdest, most public mass UFO sightings in Soviet history. And trust me, if something like that showed up over an American city in 1977, you'd never hear the end of it. Okay. Now, this next one is where things get seriously bizarre. Forget UFOs for a second. Let's talk USOs, or unidentified submerged objects. Lake Baikal, Siberia. It's the deepest lake on Earth. It holds more fresh water than all of the Great Lakes combined. And according to locals and military reports, it is crawling with weirdness. Fishermen have seen lights darting under the surface. Villagers tell old stories about craft rising out of the water silently at night. But the real jaw-dropper, in the 1980s, Soviet Navy divers claim they encountered giant humanoids under the water. Not talking 1 or 2 feet taller than us, I'm talking 3 meters tall in metallic suits. The divers tried to capture one. Boy, I'll tell you, they had guts, but the results were a mess. The being supposedly fought back, and several divers were seriously injured after being forced to the surface too fast. The story was buried, but enough leaked out that Baikal earned the nickname the Roswell of the Deep. Now, do I buy the idea of giant underwater silver-suited aliens? Well, let's say that even I'm skeptical about that. But the fact that the Soviet Navy logged it at all tells me that they saw something. And when career military divers put their reputations on the line, I tend to listen. And speaking of the Russian Roswell, on January 29th, 1986, Dalnergorsk, a mining town in the Russian Far East, residents saw a glowing red sphere buzzing across the sky, and then it crashes into a hillside, height 611, as it was called. Scientists went in expecting wreckage. No ship, no body, no saucer, but they did find something else. Scorched rock, metallic beads, glass-like droplets, and mesh fragments. Some of it was so pure, so refined, that lab technicians said it didn't match any known Soviet industrial process. Skeptics, of course, claimed that it was just slag from a smelter. Convenient, except this slag was scattered in a neat impact zone, not just dumped in a pile. And this wasn't just some backwoods rumor. The case was investigated for years, even getting attention in the West as the so-called Russian Roswell. Now, personally, I'm not saying it was an extraterrestrial, but if you crash a glowing orb into a hillside and leave behind bizarre alloys, that's not just garbage dump material. In addition to that, it bears an interesting resemblance to a lot of the spherules that Avi Loeb's team discovered off the coast of New Guinea a couple of years ago. And incidentally, those spherules were recently re-examined. And what were the results? Let's just say that they don't appear to be of this world, but I've got more details on that coming in an upcoming video. So let's go back again to 1989. Voronezh. This one is so weird that it definitely borders on science fiction. Dozens of kids are playing in a park when a giant red sphere lands. Out of it step towering beings, nearly 3 meters tall, with robotic companions. Witnesses said that one of the figures pointed a device at a child and he froze in place. By the way, sounds a little similar to the Lake Baikal aliens, but let's continue. And here's where things get really crazy, as if it wasn't crazy enough. This wasn't just some fringe UFO magazine story. TASS, the official Soviet news agency, published it overnight. Headlines about aliens landing in a Russian playground were running in major newspapers worldwide. I remember those stories, by the way. Now, I'll admit, this story is almost too wild. Beings that tall, robots, paralyzing weapons, it reads like pulp sci-fi. But for locals, it was real. And again, if the Soviets were willing to go on record, something definitely happened in Voronezh. Now, however, it's time to talk about the Soviet Area 51. The U.S. has Area 51. The Soviets had Kapustin Yar. Built after World War II, this base was where they tested rockets, nuclear weapons, and even early space vehicles. According to some leaked files, UFOs loved this place. There are stories of objects hovering over launch pads, monitoring tests, and even shutting down missile systems, which is something that has also happened to NATO missile facilities over the years as well. Some say recovered craft were stored underground at the site. Others think UFOs were simply drawn to the activity, just like they seem to hang around American nuclear bases. So what's at Kapustin Yar today? Well, it's still heavily guarded, still fenced off, and still mostly classified, which tells me the place is hiding something. But whether that's experimental Russian tech or something else entirely, it's kind of hard to say unless you're an insider, which I most definitely am not. At least not as far as Soviet insiders are concerned. But now it's time to move on to declassified files and some hoaxes as well. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the floodgates opened. Suddenly, files from the KGB and even the CIA surfaced, documenting decades of Soviet UFO reports. Objects tracked over nuclear silos, unidentified craft shadowing military jets, encounters that spooked hardened generals. But with the collapse came hoaxes too. VHS tapes of glowing discs that turned out to be frisbees, fake alien autopsies, boy, everybody loves those, and TV specials designed more for ratings than truth. Sorting fact from fiction in post-Soviet Russia became nearly impossible, but buried among the fakes, there are still those cases that stubbornly resist explanation. So, what do we make of all of this? Well, from the Tunguska fireball to the jellyfish over Petrozavodsk to giants under Lake Baikal, Russia has given the world some of the strangest UFO encounters on record. Indeed, it completely dismisses the notion that UFO encounters are an American thing or a Western thing. UFO phenomena are clearly experienced around the world, regardless of the culture, regardless of the people, regardless of the government. Were they natural disasters or military experiments, misunderstandings amplified by Cold War secrecy, or were they something else? Something we still don't have the vocabulary to explain. Well, here's the fact. Governments lie. Military officials cover things up, and witnesses, well, they don't always agree. But when you've got this many cases spread over this many decades involving this many people, you can't just wave it all away. So as usual, the answer isn't neat, but one thing is certain. Russia's skies and its frozen lakes hold secrets we still haven't cracked. If you're waiting for Moscow to give us a straight answer, yeah, don't hold your breath. Thanks very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. If you would like me to investigate Russian-related UFO sightings and go into a lot more depth on these particular incidents, make sure to put it in the comments. And if you'd like this kind of content to continue, please check the description for various ways to support this channel. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, stay angry about space.